Hi guys, welcome to my channel, The Inked Reader. I am filming today a video that I wanted to do for the whole month and finally I found some time to film. So I'm planning to do two videos with this theme, which is basically recommendations for spooky season or Halloween. If you like horror genre or if you want to get into it, those are my recommendations. Now I'm gonna start today with the books that they're not my favorite books, but they are generally spooky or overall good horror in my opinion, but they're not my favorite. I'm gonna do a second video shortly after, I hope, where I'm gonna go through my personal favorite books that also sit in the horror genre. So this is different. I've done a video about my favorite books of all times. That's different. But the videos that's gonna follow these are actually my favorite books within the horror genre. While today are just recommendations of books I generally enjoyed. Didn't necessarily make the cut for the best horror I've ever read, but I thought they definitely were worth a mention because they were definitely disturbing and fit for this season. So without further ado, without any order, I'm gonna give you some recommendations for Halloween season. So I'm gonna start with the only two that I don't have. I mean, one I've got a physical copy of, but it's way higher up on my bookshelves, and I can't reach it as of now. I don't have a ladder with me upstairs, so I'm just gonna put a picture in, and the other one I listen to on audio. So those are the only two that I don't have physical copies of. First of all, I have Ring. I never watched the movie. However, I really enjoyed this book. It's translated from Japanese and it's a quartet. I believe it's a quartet, don't quote me on these, of books. I've read the first two. I enjoyed the second one as well, kind of, but not as much as I enjoyed the first one, Ring. And this is the story of this journalist, I believe, who, a relative of his, dies very young all of a sudden of a heart attack. And when he starts to hear about this death and how it came about and investigating a bit more, it turns out that his nephew or the relative of his basically had spent a weekend in a cabin with a group of friends and they all had died at the same time, suddenly, in their early 20s to like late teenagehood. So they all died at the same time under very mysterious circumstances, and so he starts to investigate what has led to these sudden deaths. And I absolutely enjoyed the ride of this book and enjoyed finding out what is going on. I did have some hints because of course the movie is so popular that I had heard now and then what it was about, but it was so fascinating. I went into the book whilst knowing the general potential plot. I had the wrong idea of what it was, or I just had a tiny idea compared to the whole plot of what it came out to be. So I would still generally recommend the book, and if you watch the movie and then read the book or vice versa, I would be very curious to know in the comments down below which one did you prefer. Did the movie make the book justice? Let me know. Okay, so then I've got an audio. I listened to this short novella on Scribd a few months back, I believe toward the beginning of the year, and I really enjoyed it and enjoyed his writing a lot. And I do plan to find eventually a physical copy of this because I do want to keep it. And this takes place in Bohemia in the 1370. So medieval time, and you follow this bunch of mercenaries on a mission for the church, and they now travel to these lands that are cursed, and it's just a spiral into dark themes that is based on it's kind of what I called a Christian horror in a sense. So there is the element of a church and, you know, heaven, hell and stuff like that. It's all in here, and I really found it impactful and just engaging as a novella. So yeah, I was impressed by the guy, impressed by his writing, and I think that if you're looking for something very quick, maybe you can listen to the audio of it. Was very well narrated. Hellmouth, I really enjoyed the Hellmouth. Okay, then the next one is actually for a younger audience. I did generally enjoy these, and I think if you're on the younger side and again you're new to horror, so you don't know what you are okay with, this is a very good entry point, and I found the writing and just the story very engaging and entertaining. As someone who doesn't necessarily always enjoy YA, and I would not necessarily reach out for a horror YA, I found this quite again, engaging. And so this is Frozen Charlotte by Alex Bell. I had randomly picked this up, never heard someone reviewing these on BookTube or anything, but I became curious when I looked at the cover. I think I found this in Waterstone or something of the sort. And from the back it says, warning, not for younger readers. I would say like teens are okay, not children though. Don't read this with children. And you follow this girl, and her name is Sophie. Sophie goes and spends the summer at her cousin's house. They live in an ex-boarding school that had to close down due to a tragedy. So she goes to his house, and every inhabitant of the house is quite creepy, and there is a room full of dolls. Now, if you don't like, or if you're absolutely afraid of, the ceramic dolls, then maybe this book is not for you, because it's extremely creepy. And I remember my grandma having like a collection of those ceramic dolls. She still has them, and I used to play with them all the time as a kid, and now when I go back and look at and stare at the dolls, I just stare terrified at them. So I found them way creepier now as an adult than I used to do as a child. But if you're not into dolls, it's just too scary for you, don't do it. If you're scared of them but you're actually entertained by the idea of reading a horror about creepy dolls, ceramic dolls, then this is your gem. And I found actually the plot and the finding out what's going on and what happened to the boarding school quite interesting. There is a sequel to this that I still need to acquire, but I do plan to do so very soon, hopefully. And let me get out of the way one book that almost made into my favorite video, my favorite horror. The only reason why it didn't is I don't know why. I basically was compiling a list and I decided to go with 10, and this didn't make the cut of 10, but it would kind of... I really love this book. It's just that I love a few scenes, and the whole thing was very good, but the love was only for a couple of scenes. So I decided overall to put it here, but I generally love this book. Overall, I find it very entertaining, and this is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is a classic. You've heard of this a million times. It's about this bunch of people that dare to go and spend some time in this haunted house. If I remember correctly, has been a decade since I read this probably. So I really enjoyed the way this was written. I found the pace slow, and there are again just a few scenes that really caught my attention, but those scenes stuck with me. And also I believe that this was one of the first haunted houses horror I've ever read, and since then I've been loving the genre. I've been loving that kind of trope, so I do owe a lot to this book. This following book is actually a fiction book based on true events, which makes it horrifying, and I can't say I necessarily love this book or anything, but I did generally find disturbing, and I found it particularly disturbing again when I found out that this is based on true events. You can look them up, but this is The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and it's basically the story of this bunch of kids and grown-up that unfortunately torture a girl for whatever reason. I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, basically this is a torture book where a girl, and I believe her sibling as well, her sister as well, are kept in a basement and tortured. And you follow the events that lead to that, her capturing and her being kept hostage. Basically in the back it just says very briefly, a teenage girl is held captive and brutally tortured by neighborhood children. It's based on a true story, and this shocking novel reveals the depravity of which we are all capable. And there was a lot of feelings that came with these. I think this is one of those books that you need to be in the mood of, you need to be okay with, and if you're not, just put it down, don't do this to yourself, because it's very triggering, is very traumatic as an experience. Said that, it is generally a dreadful horror, and the reason why I personally read horror is because I do want to get that kind of unease in my belly. I guess humans have a fascination for the horror, not all of us, but it's like, a lot of people that stop and stare at an accident scene, although we know that we will never forget what we see. We do have a bit of, many of us, not all of us, but many of us have a kind of intrinsic curiosity for the macabre, and this definitely satisfies that part of us. So yeah, it is a good horror book, but it's such a sad true story. And then I do have Tell Me I Am Worthless. Now this is a recent entry and I did put it in here provided that this is a very weird horror, in the sense that it reads mostly as kind of a contemporary, but you're reading about people that are clearly mentally unstable. And the premise of this is that you have these three girls. They have gone to a house for a dare, an abandoned house, a few years back, and you know that only two of them come out of that house and one doesn't. And so a few years have passed and both protagonists have like suffered tremendous trauma and they're still suffering because of events of that house, but they also have a lot of inner suffering linked to their sexuality and what happened between them. And so they have a lot of things going on, and it's written very peculiarly. I remember just the experience of reading these. It was very intense but also fascinating because it was a story so far-fetched, so far away from anything that is my reality. It was like reading sci-fi basically for me. It's not sci-fi or anything of the sort, but it felt so far away from anything I've ever experienced. I was just inherently fascinated by the idea of reading such a different experience of life. And at the end, when you get into the actual horror bit, and I don't want to spoil how come, but basically there is a bit of more action. It is so disturbing and it was pretty impactful. So yeah, it's a weird one, definitely not for everyone. And I'm not expert about horror or anything, so I might be wrong in calling this a speculative horror, but it feels very odd and nothing as I've read before. And that again, there were a few scenes linked to the haunted house part that really stuck with me. So yeah, Tell Me I'm Worthless. Okay, we are down to the last two recommendations. So first of all, I've got Off Season. Now many of you will be familiar with that. I apologize, there might be some background talking. Unfortunately, the walls of this house are so thin, and even if I am a whole floor down, you can still see some talking from other rooms. So I apologize for that. Anyway, Jack Ketchum, Off Season. This is I believe it's my first cannibal horror. And it's absolutely terrifying. It was again very far-fetched, and the actions of the protagonists in this make no sense. You have to suspend belief. All humans have instincts to keep them alive, not people in this book, clearly. This is a story about this woman. She is an editor, a New York editor. She decides to take a break to focus on her job, and to do so she needs to go in a cabin in the middle of the woods with no one around and just spend a long weekend there, and she invites some friends over. Little does she know that cabin is in the middle of the hunting ground of a cannibalistic family they're kind of like primitive apes, sort of human that hunt the grounds and eat meat, and it's the worst place on earth basically where you want to go on a cabin retreat, and all hell break loose. Now this is extremely graphic and disturbing, so just make sure you're okay, but is undoubtedly a very hardcore horror. Extremely disturbing. I've got some scenes stuck in my mind. So again, these recommendations are not for everyone. Please do take care of yourself. Don't read these books thinking that, oh yeah, you're gonna be okay, it's just a bit of a spooky read. No, this is extremely disturbing. So just, yeah, even if you can't do it, just put the book down. If you read the first pages, when the shit hit the fan and you think okay, that's enough, don't continue on, because it gets worse and worse and worse. So just please take care of yourself. But if you are like me, you just like to be disturbed for life after reading a book, Off Season is a good one. And the last one is the one I actually remember the least. So this is mostly a recommendation that comes from a vibe that was left. It's not my favorite haunted house horror. That is probably going to be my favorite horror books of all time for now. But definitely has a vibe, definitely is a very creepy read for Halloween. And that is Hell House by Richard Matheson, probably butchering it, and this is the author that wrote I Am Legend, a book that I have not read yet. But look just at the cover of this. Can we just I just purchased this book, looked at this guy and was like, oh yeah, okay. And this is the essential haunted house story. Basically, you've got this house called Belasco. Belasco House has been empty and has a rep that lasted decades, and expeditions to explore the house have ended up in tragedy before, and now you follow 4 other guys that believe they are gonna be, you know, it's gonna be different for them or whether it's the case, and they decide to go in the house and, you know, unravel the mysteries of the house, and turn out to be they were no different than any other expeditions before, and things end up being pretty rough for them too. I think what I didn't love necessarily was his writing. Like I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the best thing ever. But some scenes again, and the whole vibe of a haunted house is a very, like, if you like a haunted house horror, then Hell House is definitely a good one to put on your list. But yeah, guys, that is what I have for now. Some of you might say, oh, what about Nosferatu, very famous one, which you have read. Yes, so Nosferatu by Joe Hill, it's a book that I overall found okay. I quite enjoy it, but I found the horror very much like Christmas time horror, and when I was filling in this list, I was just, I can't recommend this for Halloween. Like, it feels like a Christmas horror. Plus I did enjoy it, but not at the point. I enjoyed those books basically that I just mentioned way more than I enjoyed Nosferatu. But yeah, said that, guys, let me know your recommendations down below. I hope you decide to join, so subscribe. I'm gonna put up hopefully soon my favorite horror books for now after 2023. So stay tuned for a second part of recommendations. I hope you take care of yourself in the meantime, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!